Good day, everyone. We are the Group 1 and today we will discuss to you the narrative of Week 1 and Week 2 about reading in Philippine history. In this lesson, students are expected to differentiate primary and secondary sources of historical records. Next, to examine and assess critically the value of historical evidences and sources. And last, to appreciate the importance of history in the social and national life of the Philippines. Now, what is the meaning of history? History derived from the Greek word historia, which means knowledge acquired through inquiry or investigation, also known as the study and the documentation of the past. History also focused on writing about wars, revolutions, and other important breakthroughs. Furthermore, history is the study of change over time, and it covers all aspects of human society: political, social, economic, scientific, technological, medical, cultural, intellectual, religious, and military developments are all part of history. So what about the purpose or importance of history? Studying history allows us to observe and understand how people and societies behave. For instance, we are able to evaluate war, even when a nation is at peace, by looking back at previous events. History provides us with the data that is used to create laws or theories about various aspects of society. Additionally, history knowledge is crucial to protect democracy. By preserving authentic and meaningful documents, artifacts, images, stories, and places, future generations have a foundation on which to build and know what it means to be a member of the civic community. One of the examples of history in the Philippines is our culture. The culture of the Philippines comprises a blend of traditional Filipino and Spanish Catholic traditions, with influences from America and other parts of Asia. The Filipinos are family-oriented and often religious, with an appreciation for art, fashion, music, and food.
What is no document, no history? No document, no history once said. In this century, the notion of a document has been enormously expanded so that any artifact surviving from the past can serve as the answer to some historian question. Aerial photography, for example, can reveal settlement patterns long since buried. But who say that no document, no history? After the Civil War, Emon de Valera spent a year as guest of the nation in Arbor Hill. He believed this collection would prove that he had been right all along, quoting the word of the French historian Charles. Singibus, history is made with document. No document, no history. In Europe, in the 19th century, a famous German historian Leopold von Ranke said that no document, no history. No document, there is no history. Ranke claims that in the modern world, the elements of myth in historical source should be reduced. Who is Leopold von Ranke? Leopold von Ranke was a German historian and a founder of modern source-based history. According to Caroline Herfeli, Ranke was probably the most important historian to shape historical profession as it emerged in Europe and the United States in the late 19th century. No document, no history. One said, in this century, the notion of document has been enormously expanded so that any artifact surviving from the past can serve as the answer to some historian question. Aerial photography, for example, can reveal state settlement patterns long since buried.
Good day, everyone. My name is Hazel P.M. Apolonio from Beta 2HE. The topic that I'm going to talk to you this afternoon is about question of history, historiography. But before I move on to those questions, let me introduce to you first what is historiography. So, historiography is the history of history. Historiography covers how historians have studied and developed history, including the sources, the techniques, and the theoretical approaches that they've used. Historiography should not be confused with history because history is the study of the past, the event that happened in the past. Historiography focuses on how a certain historical text was written, who wrote it, what was the context of its publication, what historical method is employed, and what sources were used. So, in other terms, historiography is the study of how history was written. Now let's move on these three questions that basic and historiography. First question is, what is history? So, ano nga ba yung history? So, according to this and according to one of my classmates a while ago, history derived from the Greek word historia, which means knowledge acquired through investigation and inquiry. So, the next question that this historiography was given was, why study history? So, bakit nga ba tayo nag-aaral ng history? So, because studying history helps us to understand and grapple with complex questions and dilemmas by examining how the past has shaped and continue to shape as time passed by global, national, and local relationship between societies and people. The third question that we have here is, for whom history are for? So, para kanino yung history or yung pag-aaral natin ng history? So, according to our answers and also to the answer that was given, history are for everyone. Why? Because the history of the world that we know today was written by the victors, and it was written for every one of us. For what? Why? What? For us to experience the past and study it to serve as a guide for the future. So, regardless of their nationality, the skin color, the gender, the age preference, can read and learn about the history of the world. Just like us, we study it for us to know how our ancestors struggled to repel the invader and their drive to create an independent country that offers freedom to its citizens.
Good afternoon, everyone. Today I am going to discuss the positivism and postcolonialism on history. Positivism emerged between the 18th and 19th century, though it requires empirical and observable evidence before one can claim that a particular knowledge is true. It entails an object's means of arriving at conclusion. Positivist historians are expected to be objective and impartial not just in their arguments but also in their conduct of historical research. Next is postcolonialism. It was emerged in 20th century when formerly colonized nations grappled with the idea of creating their identities and understanding their societies against the shadows of their colonial past. There are two things in written history. First, to tell history of their nation that will highlight their identity, free from the colonial discourse and knowledge. The second one is to criticize methods, effects, and idea of colonialism. Post-colonial history, therefore, are action and an alternative to the colonial history that colonial powers created and taught to their subject.
What is history in the historian? The word historian is a relatively unambiguous word. It means simply a man who tries to write history. But the word history is thoroughly unambiguous. It may refer to events which have taken place in the past, or it may refer to the written record of those events. So, what is the relationship between the history and the historian? Historians study history. History is an area of knowledge, a subject taught in school. Historians are people that work to analyze historical events.
It is to seek historical evidences and facts, but also interpret these facts, to give meaning to these facts and organize them into a timeline. It is to establish causes, write history, a person of his own who is influenced by his own context, environment, ideology, education, and influences. His interpretation of the historical fact is affected by his context and circumstances. He subjectively will inevitably influence the process of his historical research, the methodology he will use, the facts he shall select and deem relevant. His interpretation in the form of his writings. So next is, what is historical methodology? Historical methodology is the process by which historians gather evidence and formulate ideas about the past. It is the framework through which an account of the past is constructed, compromises certain techniques and rules that historians follow in order to properly utilize sources and historical evidences in writing history. Certain rules apply in cases of conflicting accounts in different sources and on how to properly treat eyewitness accounts and oral sources as valid historical evidence.
Good day, everyone. Our topic for today is all about historical sources. But before we start, I would like to introduce myself. I am Melanie Joy Barangas, a BT-led 1 student. Now, what is historical sources? Historical resources is something that tell us about history. It can be a document, a picture, a sound recording, a books, a cinema films, and a television program. So, yung historical sources daw po is yun yung mga bagay na makukuhanan or makakapagbigay sa atin ng kaalaman tungkol sa mga nangyari noong mga nakaraang panahon. Any sorts of artifacts from the period in questions that conveys information can quality as a source. There are two classifications of historical sources. First is a primary sources and second is a secondary sources. What is primary sources? A primary sources is something that originate from the past. Original records created by participants at the times of historical event occurred or even will after event. It can be a letter, a newspaper, an original photographs, and an artworks. Next is secondary sources. A secondary sources is analyze a scholarly question and use primary sources as evidence. Secondary sources are works that analyze, assess, or interpret a historical event, era, or phenomenon, generally utilizing primary source to do so. So, sa tulong daw po ng primary sources, makakabuo tayo ng secondary sources. Sa pamamagitan ng pag-i-interpret ng yung mga data ng nasa primary sources, makakabuo tayo ng panibagong sources at yun po ang tinatawag na secondary sources. Ang mga example po ng secondary sources ay ang mga textbooks, articles, encyclopedias, and criticism or commentaries.
Good day to everyone. I am next reporter in our group and I will discuss about criticism. That when examining a source, the historian must conduct external and internal criticism. Let's come first to external criticism. It is the practice of verifying the authenticity of evidence by examining the physical characteristics. Also, consistency with the historical characteristic of the time when it was produced. in the materials used for the evidence. It means that this criticism establishes the validity by determining the authenticity of the course that deals with relating to form and appearances rather than meaning of contents. It is used by historians and exegetes to determine the validity of a document, particularly a document with some sort of historical significance. Let's come now to internal criticism. It is the examination of the truthfulness and factuality of the evidence. It looks at the content of the source and examines the circumstance of its production. It could be done by looking at the author, its content, agenda, the purpose behind its creation. In this criticism, it determines the reliability by correctly interpreting the contents of the documents. It is used to detect whether the document contains error or lies, as the external criticism is confined to defect and determine whether the document is the trace of a forgery or not. It involves a scientific examination of the relevance of the data. It is because many writers will not have adequate knowledge of the given situation. That's all about criticism. Thank you for listening.
Deception case in the Philippine history. Hoax Code of Calintiao. The code was a set of rules contained in an Effic Maragtas which was allegedly written by Dato Calintiao. The document was sold to National Library and was regarded as an important pre-colonial document. In 1968, an American historian, William Henry Scott, debunked the authenticity of the code due to the lack of evidence to prove that the code existed in pre-colonial society. Ferdinand Marcos as a World War II soldier. This was widely believed by students of history that Marcos had war medal to show. But this claim was disproven when historian counterchecked Marcos' claims with the war records of the United States. Let's proceed to historical agencies. Are you familiar with NHCP, NAP, NCCA, and National Library? Yes, all of those are the historical agencies. Let me discuss with you what they are and where they are located. Let's talk about the NHCP, or the National Historical Commission of the Philippines. It is a government agency of the Philippines. Its mission is the promotion of the Philippine history, cultural heritage through research, dissemination, conversation, site management, and heraldry works. It is located at NHCP Building, TM Calao Avenue, Ermita, Manila, Manila, Philippines. Next is NAP, or the National Archives of the Philippines, is an agency of the Republic of the Philippines mandated to collect, store, preserve, and available archival records of the government and the primary resources pertaining to the history and the development of the country. It is located at the 1st and 6th floor People Building, 1000 UN Avenue, corner 1000 San Marcelino Street, Manila, 1007, Metro Manila. Next is NCCA, or the National Commission for Culture and the Arts of the Philippines. It is the official government agency for the culture in the Philippines, and it is located at NCCA Building, 633 General Luna Street, Intramuros, Manila. And the last one is the National Library. The National Library of the Philippines is the official National Library of the Philippines. The complex is located in Ermita on a portion of Rizal Park Pass, Pasing, and TM Calao Avenue, neighboring of culturally significant buildings such as the Museum of the Philippines, Political History, and the National Historical Commission. That will be all, and thank you.